The Starside Prophecy by Tirri. Read by the author. Chapter 36. He's got the whole world in his hands. Alusha was standing on her roof terrace and materialised a cup of tea which she plucked from the air between pinching fingers. Alusha was always drinking rare and strange brews. Recently, a friend who had spent time on a fertile planet in the Andromeda galaxy had brought back some type of tree bark that smelled minty when ground and did wonders for the imagination. Today she had decided to lay off otherworldly concoctions, however, in favour of something more ordinary, pekoe with a touch of orange, that she had grown on her roof terrace. When duty didn't call, Alusha often spent her nighttime hours tending her botanicals, then drinking them, then listening to distant sounds of the music bearers as they welcomed home returning souls in the mists. The fountain of youth in the square below gushed out its eternal outpouring of water that magically halted the ageing process so abhorred by most in the physical, and Alusha noticed many souls slow down as they passed, soaking in the spray and immediately feeling its revitalising effects. Alusha then reattuned her attention further afield to another parish, Parish 1, about 100 miles away. Architecturally, Parish 1's buildings were primitive compared to those of the other parishes, but they were pristine in their own right, thought Alusha, products of the fullest potential of craftsmanship. Melchizedek had always placed particular importance on the notion that each soul going in utero should firstly be acquainted with an environment analogous to their future surroundings. He affirmed such familiarity made the transition less shocking. Alusha had disagreed and pointed out that the majority of souls being born on the African continent were in for a shock of their lives no matter what type of preparation had occurred. Many of the souls gathered at Parish 1, the oldest of all parishes, would soon find themselves on the most arid of continents, a destination that had always offered a more rigorous experience than anywhere else on planet Earth. Parish 1 had been overseeing the affairs of sojourning souls going back into the far recesses of time. Back then, when Africa was still attached to Pangaea, souls experiencing the physical were doing so through the awareness of reptilian consciousness, then mammalian, then human. These days, segments of Africa had been set aside for the purposes of karmic atonement. This had not been written into the original constitution, a body of fundamental principles to which every parish adhered, but times had changed. Since Melchizedek's final incarnation on Earth, more souls than expected had made poor use of their free will, and amendments had been called for. Such was the nature of free will. Alusha focused her attention on a patch of daisies growing beneath a wanza tree and zoomed in on the centre of one tiny bloom. She could see the midnight blue mound of geometrically perfect, intricately laced stamens, surrounded by an outer ring of yellow petals, attached to a cerise pink band that fused into the soft white petals. The perfect little plant grew in the segregated part of the south, the Cape region of Africa, where those currently participating functioned with a prejudice that secured their elite position in the face of their black servants. The Cape region was also home to those participating souls who were the recipients of prejudice due to their own past behaviours stemming from their commitment to tribalism and bigotry. Africa's once legally recognised slave trading system had greatly contributed to the need for such unpleasant karmic pockets, but such places were destined to become obsolete as man's identification with anti-force consciousness declined. Alusha rested her eyes upon a young female soul, Baranu, who was sitting among the daisies and radiated a palpable nervousness that Alusha had seen many times before. Despite the reassurances of her guide, Baranu was unable to overcome her dread. The level 1 soul would soon be in utero to a panic-stricken young mother burdened with having another mouth to feed. Baranu would never know her father, who was scheduled to die of AIDS prior to his daughter's premature birth. Baranu plucked a daisy and stared at it. Another flower immediately replaced it. Baranu examined the flower without noticing its exquisite beauty, and then with quick pinching movements she began plucking off each petal, grinding it in her fingers and discarding the remains with disdain. As she maimed another daisy, tears rolled down Burano's cheeks. Her tears were not deprived from self-pity, just self-disgust. Burano recalled the life she deeply regretted abusing. She had been born a male and became a Bolshevik supporter of the Russian Revolution and subsequent aide to the Premier of the new Republic. The Premier had been an effective minister, but ran the Republic with callous indifference, denying the masses basic needs. Moreover, he was able to justify suffering as a natural and unavoidable consequence of industrial growth. As a result of his very purposeful machinations, a famine had ensued, and people of the peasant classes had died by the tens of millions, while the high-ranking officials like Burano drank vodka and ate stroganoff. Burano had already endured one lifetime in the scorching village of Sabita, but her karma dictated the need for another round of exposure that would enable her to experience more profoundly the emotions she had inflicted upon those she once governed. Starvation would be all around her, and being unable to escape it, she would have to endure it. In the life plan she and her guide had recently finalised, Burano was destined to watch 3 of her 5 children die of malnutrition. It had also been decreed that 2 of her babies would die in her belly because she herself would be too malnourished to feed them. Neither fetus would be assigned souls. Unlike Burano, some of the souls gathered at Parish 1, being new to the human experience, some having visited planet Earth as humans only a couple of times since their inauguration, were karma-free. These souls were encouraged to choose lives whereby external stimuli of the rat race neon kind would be minimal. The African savannah was one such place, as were the mountains of Bolivia and the backwater jungles of Malaysia. They would all lead basic but trouble-free existences in order to gently ease themselves into the human cycles. Asifa, Burano's guide, was swimming in the crystal blue waters of the Jordan, which teemed with exotic fish and plant life. He often bathed in the hallowed place of peace. The Jordan's only above-ground appearance lasted several miles before it once again re-entered the aquifer. The underground tributaries of the river supplied the life-affirming waters that gushed from all Starside fountains. Even from far away, Asifa was aware of the fluctuating emotions of all those under his charge. Asifa exited the river quickly, grabbing his robe from the bank before relocating to Burano's side using speed of intention travel, the instant contingency suitable for occasions when time was of the essence. Through a shaft of the sun's rays, Alusha watched as the dark wet-skinned man wearing a white cotton garbi appeared at Burano's side. He was 6'11", and his black curly hair was shorn to a half-inch nap. His piercing blue eyes were offset by a youthful sclera, which were the whitest of whites, as were his teeth. Burano had always teased her guide that his teeth looked like big white tombstones. Asifa pulled Burano to her feet, and she dissolved into his embrace. A good solid hug always seemed to calm her down. Alusha attuned her hearing. Asifa's voice was deep and full of compassion. Burano, your despondency will at some point be replaced with the sense that all is well and all is on track, but that might not be any time soon. During your eternal future, your debt will be paid in full, but until then your ascension will be particularly challenging, just as mine had been. As you know, I am a very old soul, and like you, I have spent many harsh lifetimes atoning for the exploits of just one. Tomorrow you will find yourself in your antechamber, and shortly after that your mother's womb. You, my dear Burano, will not be back Starside for 19 years, but when you do return, it will all just seem like a blink of an eye. Trust me, okay? Come now, your friends are waiting. It's time for you to say farewell. Alusha refocused her attention on the settlement of huts that crowned the top of the hill. She could see smoke rising from the fire, as well as the steam from a huge metal pot of simmering stew. Asifa released Burano from his embrace, semi-confident that she was somewhat stable. He then clasped her hand and led her up the winding path that led to the settlement. Like all the huts that surrounded it, the abode she had been calling home for the past month was unassuming on the outside and sparsely decorated on the inside. To the left of the settlement, down in the valley, several herds of grazing wildlife roamed freely. 5 souls squatting around the campfire were preparing the send-off feast. Wat, an Ethiopian stew served with injera flatbread, and Tej, a potent honey wine. Baranu and the others of her karmic level would enjoy their last hearty meal to come for some time, and later Asifa would lead a celebration of dance and worship. The participating souls would paint each other's faces with chalk and ochre, and Asifa would adorn them with colourful beads. Alusha blinked with a start and immediately reattuned her attention. Melchizedek's voice had just come alive in her head. "Hi, Alusha. Would you mind stopping by?" "When?" "Now." "Sure. I'll be there shortly." Alusha threw her cup over the edge of the terrace and it disappeared into thin air. She then walked back into her penthouse and changed out of her robe and into leggings and a t-shirt with the words "Long Live Africa" emblazoned across the front. She wondered whether Heap and Hetty would enjoy a vacation on the Serengeti. Coming into existence herself as a monkey cross on Meepo, Africa had been an obvious choice for Alusha to begin her evolutionary experiences. She had loved that environment, especially the heartland that had come to be known as Chad. Using speed of intention travel, Alusha relocated to the Department of Planning, immediately in front of the elevator bank. She then pressed the button marked Observatory. She could have materialised at Melchizedek's side, but decided not to. As the elevator door slid open, Alusha saw Melchizedek standing in front of the eye, his back to her. He wore his favourite white shirt, a gift from Sarah, and stood with his arms behind his back. The creature planet centrally orbiting the vastness of the immediate space was, as usual, the focus of his attention. Alusha made her way across the room, passing by the statue of the naked Mary Magdalene, her arms and legs entwined around her lover. Melchizedek had captured every detail she noted for the millionth time. Every muscle, every tendon, every pore, every hair and every bead of sweat. Alusha knew that Melchizedek was aware of her presence, but could tell he was not yet ready to snap back. The spell would only be broken when the godson was ready to break it. Alusha arrived at the godson's side. Earth looked beautiful from where she was standing, but a lot of what was taking place within its confines was not beautiful at all for many. Alusha could only see the surface of the planet, not the day-to-day lives of those within it. And why would she want to? She saw what it did to him. To be a godson meant having to experience one's own evolution. The Creator was experiencing himself. This was why Yanni had not taken the next step, because it required levels of stamina beyond the endurance of most. And guts, thought Alusha. Guts above all else. Several more minutes passed by before Melchizedek broke his gaze from the eye. "Hello, Alusha. Thank you for somewhat following the rules that keep your legs nicely toned." Melchizedek put an arm around the Dreamtime consort's shoulders and steered her towards the oyster table. He then pulled out her chair and sat down in the chair immediately next to it. The godson then turned to look at Alusha's profile and lifted her chin up ever so slightly with his fingertips. "You really are beautiful, one of Meepo's finest." "One of?" Melchizedek laughed, and so did Alusha. "Why don't you tell me what you need?" said Alusha, turning to face the godson. "Yanni is waiting for me." "He's a lucky man." "Yes, he is." Melchizedek didn't have to tell Alusha what he needed. Alusha always knew what Melchizedek was feeling. Indeed, there was very little she didn't know about him. They had been a lot of things to each other over a very long time, and any secrets that had once existed had long since been shared. Melchizedek and Alusha were fully allied, co-joined in instinctive operation to ensure his creature planet functioned in complete and perfect precision. "It's time for you to eat," said Alusha. "I promised Sarah I would look after you while she was gone." A glass of sparkling water full of cucumber slices and strawberries, and a baguette stuffed with camembert and tomatoes appeared before the godson. Melchizedek pushed the plate away but picked up the water. After several successive gulps it was gone. He then set the glass down and sat back, interlocking his hands behind his head. "Well, Alusha, it is now time for Sarah to travel further afield." "I agree. I'll visit her tonight. A quick whoosh around the globe should reinforce her curiosity." "As a bird, perhaps?" "Yes, that will do nicely. Is there anything else you need?" "How about an early dinner, 6 o'clock at Salvatore's? Bring Yanni." "I will. He wouldn't miss it for the world." "The world, Alusha?" Melchizedek sighed and closed his eyes, momentarily shaking his head as if an intrusion of doubt was forcing the subtle movement. "I began from seed. I emerged. I developed. I bloomed. Then I became. Now I experience myself. Every creature in the world is me, and me the world." Alusha stood up and moved behind the godson's chair. She pulled his lattice fingers apart and placed them gently on his lap, then began massaging the base of the godson's skull, up and down his neck muscles, kneading and pinching the soft tissue. Melchizedek pushed back into her strong but nimble hands, and Alusha took his many imperceptible groans to be a sign that he was beginning to relax. "Yes, it does feel like you might have the weight of the world upon your shoulders." Alusha increased the pressure, making sure her kneading fingers and the heel of her hand possessed the full measure of her female strength. Melchizedek moaned but did not resist. He was now visibly relaxed. The weight of the world had temporarily lifted. As she moved her hands down his shoulders, Alusha leaned forward, and in the voice of an angel began to softly hum a tune into his ear, until the words, as she remembered them, poured out as a tender lullaby. "He's got the whole world. In his hands he's got the whole wide world. In his hands he's got the whole world. In his hands he's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the wind and the rain. In his hands he's got the wind and the rain. In his hands he's got the wind and the rain. In his hands he's got the whole world in his hands. He's got you and me, brother. In his hands he's got you and me, brother. In his hands he's got you and me, brother. In his hands he's got the whole world in his hands." Melchizedek's breathing was even and deep. The sweet voice of Alusha had consumed his awareness, and for the first time in days he felt himself being lulled into the sleep of a newborn. "He's got the itty little baby. In his hands he's got the itty little baby. In his hands he's got the itty little baby. In his hands he's got the whole world in his hands." Alusha sang for a little while longer, and then quietly stepped back and made her way towards the elevator. As the door slid closed, she stole one last look at the godson, in his chair, in a state of slumber, in his observatory, on top of the world.